Jason Lords, testing the range of our microphone.
I can hear you, Jason.
She can hear me. He's super excited. But you can't hear it? It's not going through our speakers? Your outputting levels. Can you send me that link? Yeah. Yeah, mic check, 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 check. Check, 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 mic, check, 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 mic, check, 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 check. We're in the Thunder Ridge Library Media Center and taking a look at this is the overflow area, and this is where the public can view. And we have audio and picture. It looks good. So if you're in the neighborhood and want to come watch it with social distancing, tonight's board meeting, it's available here in the Media Center at Thunder Ridge as we get ready to start this board meeting shortly after 7 o'clock tonight.
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
Is this working? It is working? Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight and call our meeting to order. We're going to go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And our flag is right here. If everybody would like to stand and follow me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then we'll have our prayer by Scott Lynch.
I'll do that right here. Our Father in heaven, we are indeed grateful to gather as board and community members this night, and we're grateful for all that we have, and we ask that we'll receive thy blessing this night as we discuss the affairs of our community and our students. And we pray and ask that we'll be guided and directed to help make the best decisions and to help those that we can. And we pray and we ask that as our community is suffering right now, that they will receive some healing and that we can all come together. And we pray that as we execute the decisions tonight, it will be in their behalf. And we pray for those who are suffering at this time and who can't be with us, that they'll be watched over and that they'll be protected. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
We'll call the meeting to order and have a roll call. Chad Dance.
Here.
Greg Calder.
Here.
Paul Jenkins. Scott Lynch.
Here.
Naomi Landers, I'm here. We would just like to welcome any visitors who are not with us and joining us online. I could see everybody who's here. It's not very many. And the public access can be found on the district home webpage, the www.d93schools.org, under the school board tab. And the patrons can submit written comments or speak directly to the board through a Zoom meeting link provided on that webpage. Due to the sensitive nature, complaints about personnel or an individual student must be submitted in accordance to Board Policy 4112, Uniform Grievance. Grievance forms are found on the district's home webpage under the School Board tab and then Board Policies. Okay. So we need to have our meeting, our agenda changed tonight, and to amend the agenda pursuant to Idaho Code 74204-4A. We're amending the agenda for this meeting as follows: to add the Blue Cross of Idaho contract to the consent calendar. This request was received today and is time sensitive. So we would need a motion to amend the agenda for the stated reason.
I so move.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Calder, seconded by Mr. Jenkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we would also need a motion to go ahead and approve the agenda as amended.
I so move.
Second.
Was that Mr. Dance? Yeah. So been moved by Mr. Calder, seconded by Mr. Dance. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Does the board, any member of the board, would they want to remove any items from the consent calendar? Hearing nothing, we would need a motion to go ahead and approve the consent calendar.
I would make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Jenkins, seconded by Mr. Dance. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then with public input, Mary, do we have any public input that you've received online? Okay, and we don't have any here in person. So we don't have any public input tonight. We are going to go ahead and turn the time over to Dr. Wolstenham to give us a report on the state of the district.
Thank you, Chairman Landers. I just want to take a brief moment and talk about just overall how our students did with their academic performance, which also in this case will be their attendance for this trimester. As we adopted that mastery-based learning approach, that was one of the commitments we made, is that we would use that to go ahead and determine our attendance to report to the state, which seemed like, well, it's still the right idea. It seemed like a simpler idea at the time, and now I think I've got about a week's worth of Excel work to do to make that actually a reality for us. But Jason, I'm going to share something with you if you're okay to share there. And I don't have much but one graph to share with you, but is the projector still on? I can probably do it too. So while we're pulling up the graph, overall as a district, we ended up at right around 93% course completion. So that'll be our attendance report to the state as well. That's about 2% below where we've been for the year, maybe just 1.5%. So surprisingly not a significant difference from where we've been. And so the chart, once it'll load up for Jason, just shows school by school where we ended up. Typically our elementaries were in the high 90s, somewhere around 96 to 97% at the elementary level. Our high schools were all about 89 to 90%, and then Lincoln was our one real challenge, and they were all the way down to 68% of their students completing their courses, or a 68% course completion rate for their students. So again, certainly not an ideal situation, but I think given all the different challenges and things that kids are facing, I think that's really commendable. Speaks a lot to the effort that our teachers put in and the work that our kids and families put in to stay engaged. So just any questions from the board on that right now? So that's just to get a school by school comparison. So maybe it's still Jason's computer. So this one, not labeled, but this was a summary. So elementary schools, this number right here was the 97% was the completion rate for all of our elementary schools. All of our two middle schools were 94%. And then our high schools, again, it's like 89% was the average for the high schools without Lincoln in there. And then overall as a district, this shows 94%. We ran one more report today. It's surprising how challenging it is to calculate this, but had our power school team run one more report for us, and it came out right around 93% for this trimester. So yes.
I had one quick question. So is that after the 2 weeks that we went past the May 15th?
Yep, those are mostly final grades. So I mean, school's over, teachers are done. Camille Vosk from technology said she did still have some teachers contacting her with a student or two saying, hey, the student got his work turned in. Let's go and change their grade from an I to a P, but overall that number won't change. So yeah, that's as of the end of the school year. Yes and no. So there would be a budgetary impact, except that the state said that they would take our average. So, but I feel like last thing I want to do is submit a fraudulent report to the state saying our attendance is higher than it was. So if we were to take our attendance records as is, it would show a much higher percentage than that. The challenge is the way we report to the state is actually student by student. So we have to go through all 13,400 of our students and basically adjust their attendance down to match their course completion. So it's going to be a bit of a project to do that. I wish we could just turn it in and say, by the way, we ran this and it's actually 93%, and maybe it's worth a conversation with the state before we spend a week recalculating attendance for all of our kids. So.
So, Dr. Wilson-Hume, for students that received an I incomplete, what happens with them?
So our board policy says that they have until the end of the next grading period to complete that work, and I'm grateful that that was already in policy, and we really don't have to make any changes. And so that'll be our conversation with principals in August and with teachers. Is we still need to give these opportunities to a student to demonstrate that they've met proficiency on those essential standards to start the school year next year. So we'll have to build in some time for kids to do that, but according to policy, they would have all the way to the end of first trimester next year to complete the work they would need to.
And do we have a sense how many of that 7% that didn't, or that have eyes or whatever, how many of those just didn't engage at all versus engaged but just couldn't finish the work?
Yeah, that's the challenge, is because we're just looking at final grades. It'd really take probably a teacher by teacher report to get the sense on that.
Okay.
I guess, Greg, I think my overall feeling is that probably most of those kids didn't engage at all, because I think if the kids engaged, teachers reached out and they really supported them, helped them through that. So my guess is it's probably 7% of the kids that just, for whatever reason, could not or did not engage in the work.
Call it a year.
Yep. Yep.
Is there anything else, Scott, or were those the numbers?
So
that you were wanting?
yeah, that's really the key report. The other thing, and we'll talk more in depth on this in our work session, which I think is next week, but just as an update with the board, we did have a really good start of a discussion on opening school plans for next August. We had a larger than normal district leadership team meeting where we included Luana Bunn from the custodial department and Mike Graham. Well, transportation couldn't make it actually, but our maintenance department, food services, child nutrition was there. And so just started talking about the key different things we need to be thinking about for next school year. James Corbett from Eastern Idaho Public Health was also on the phone with us as we talked through that. So felt like we got good guidance from them, and we'll start working on that plan. And so I think in our work session next week, we'll at least have some key things to share with you from that, and then look to probably get that approved. I'm hopeful by if not the July board meeting, at least the July retreat, so it's ready for August. But all in all, I didn't see, there's hurdles, but not roadblocks, which to me is super promising. I haven't seen anything from Eastern Idaho Public Health saying you have to do this, and there's no way we couldn't do that. So they've just been really, really good to work with and understand the realities that we're facing as we try to start school up. So
That's good news.
And any thoughts about the 7% and what we could have done different or whatever to reduce that number? And any feedback from teachers, or I don't know. I know it's tough on when you don't even have time to get ready for it.
yeah, I think the best thing we could have done was, and this will sound a little egotistical, I don't mean to, but I think the plan we had before the state shut our schools down was the right plan, and that is let kids go home that need to be home or that parents want to keep them home and provide online, but for the kids that really need to be here, let's keep our schools open for those kids. Because once they're out the doors, there's just, our teachers, we had teachers that made personal visits to kids' houses. Principals made multiple phone calls, text messages, to the point that people were hanging up on them and say, quit calling us. It was not from a lack of effort or engagement from our teachers, and I just don't know what else we could have done to help support those kids other than give an opportunity to stay in school.
Yep. Appreciate that. Thank you.
I think maybe following up with the teachers too, and probably pursue that a little bit more to get more
Yeah, we did that. We did a survey with teachers about 3 to 4 weeks in, and we had them report back on their level of contact, and I feel like that's what they were saying at that point is we've tried, and they're just not responding to us. And again, we had some kids that simply picked up and they left the area. Some kids that went to work because they had to help provide for their families. There's just a lot of different circumstances kids found themselves in.
Well, we appreciate the report on that, so thank you. And Dr. Wilstenhume, so the school reopening plan, are we gonna have that at the work session, or did you want
Yes.
to go into anything about that?
No, I don't. Right now, I think unless there's like big ticket questions that you guys might have right now, we talked about the logistical impact of physical distancing and where it's possible or practical and where it's not. James Corbett again was very understanding of that. He realizes that on a school bus it's not possible, so we kind of talked about some alternative ideas. I think one key strategy that we'll put in place are temperature checks, and we'll talk more about what that'll look like in our work session. So again, I think we've got at least the broad parameters we have to work within identified, and then we'll just start working through the details.
I get asked often, what's
Yeah.
the plan or whatever, and I felt reasonably comfortable because of our conversations to talk through that. But what would you recommend we say to people? I mean, just as kind of something like, for example, yes, we are planning on opening. The details about how we're continuing to be worked on, or I don't know. What would you recommend?
Yeah. The email that I sent today in response to that question basically was we started the plan, but we've got a good month's worth of work to do before it's finished, and our intent is to have that out to the public in August so that they're aware, and then they can make whatever decisions they need to make in response to it. So. And then again, just I guess to me, the one big question mark is whether the state board is going to do something that derails our plans.
Yes.
And how we would respond if they do. So I don't have any sense about that right now.
I think it's interesting, there was an article that was written, I think might have been in the Idaho Ed News, I can't remember, but it had the Boise schools, how they took a survey and what the parents wanted, and it was a really high number of parents that just want their kids to go back to school. And I was thinking about the survey that you sent out to our parents, and our numbers were even higher. I think we were like 94
Yeah.
that want their kids to go back, even though some of them wanted maybe some precautions to be put into place, but it was like 94%.
Yeah.
So we were even higher than the Boise schools. So
Yeah.
man, this is going to be a big thing if they come down and put us every other day in school.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead of the curve on that, but I guess if the state board makes a decision that we fundamentally disagree with, I think it's worth a conversation at this point. Last spring, I didn't really feel that way. I think we did what we had to, but I think if it comes to reopening our schools and we're being told we can't, I think we need to have a conversation about that. I'm not ready to accept a decision from Boise about that.
I feel like the parents are going to freak out. They
Yeah.
really want their kids back. I think, and the kids want to be back. The kids really want to be back.
Right.
I was asking some of the girls from my neighborhood what the biggest thing is that they feel like they've learned from this whole thing, and I was not expecting what they said, but the first thing out of their mouth is, we miss school.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. I was expecting maybe a deeper answer out of them, but that was what they all said, so.
Maybe just one other key thing with that is we have made, I think, a pretty good push for those parents that express some interest in online. So just over the last 2 weeks, we did a follow-up message to those parents that responded that way to the survey. We did a Facebook Live event for those families last week. Not a super high turnout for it, somewhere around 100 people I think viewed that. We went ahead and sent out the recording of that as well. And really we're saying if you want to go to online, you've got till next Wednesday to submit an open enrollment application to essentially be guaranteed a spot. And after that, we can't promise that that'll be an option. And there's been a handful, but not a groundswell. So again, I think that just reiterates that most people want their kids back in regular school. Again, great thing that we've got that option available for those families. But right now we've got to make those staffing decisions. And so just not seeing that a huge push, and certainly the number we've seen right now are numbers we can accommodate. So anyway, so we're feeling really good about those things.
I know you guys are aware of this, but I've had some teachers contact me and say, how are we supposed to do both? Like if we do have to go every other day with half the kids in school and half online, back and forth, and especially I think when you get into those secondary schools, it's not like you just have one set grade in those classes.
Yeah.
And so some of those teachers would have to be here every day, but how do they address the online as well? And
Yeah.
they've pointed out that it was a lot harder than they thought it was going to be. I
Yeah.
think you've even mentioned that the teachers put a lot more time in on the online side of it than I think anybody thought that they were going to. I never would have guessed how hard it was for them.
Yeah.
So that's something I know going forward that we're going to have to address as well.
Chairman Landers. I just got a text message that they're having a hard time hearing the board. If you make sure your microphone's turned on the video.
It is, but I'll move my mouth forward. I'm on, right? Okay. Okay. All right. Are we good to go on to the next thing on the agenda? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and have Jason Lords present a policy to the board for initial consideration.
I have a handout, I know you have it in your board book, but just in case you want a hard copy. You're welcome. You're welcome. Yep, doing hard copy. So, that one's loud. You want this one, Amy? This one's really loud. So in front of you, and you should have this in your board book as well, but we have the policy. If you remember, we had talked in a work session and a couple of different board meetings about looking at we had 3 different policies that all dealt with curriculum materials, learning materials review, and then selection and adoption of curriculum materials. And we wanted to take those 3 policies and put them into one, so that whether it's administrators or parents or whoever's looking for it, one of the frustrating things as an administrator is you go to one policy and you go, oh, okay, there's my answer, and then all of a sudden you make a decision and someone comes back and they're like, hey, you didn't do this, this, or this. Oh, I didn't know about that policy. I thought I found my answer. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with policies just in general is to try and get them in one place, so you're not having to go a bunch of different places. So through that conversation, and then with just different things that we've changed as far as approving supplemental curriculum and just doing those different things, that's where this policy is coming from. We made a number of changes since the last time that we talked. When we met last time, we received some great feedback from all of you about things that you feel like would be beneficial to be in the policy. We also received some feedback from ISBA on our question with the dual credit question. A lot of the changes at the beginning of the policy, this first page is I think taking certain phrases out that just don't really fit. When we looked at the policy, it had been reviewed, but like I said, looking at the 3 policies, we felt like there were statements that are farther down or that maybe we don't need in there. So that's really what the first page is. Looking at, we had changed and added positions in there, like Director of Instruction and Learning will approve this, but what we, through conversations with the learning team and with our leadership team, our executive team, was instead of putting superintendent designee on everything, so every time that a title changes or whatever else, that we don't have to go in and make those changes. From the first page, same thing with that second page, mostly just cleaning up some of the wording. The big change is on the third page, the selection of textbooks and curriculum materials for dual credit classes. That was I think a lot of the conversation that we had. And if you look in there, were the things that we talked about. The first one, then number one, I think was the one where Greg had brought up using the word recognizes instead of, I don't remember what we, yeah, instead of delegates that we had before. So the wording on that is the board recognizes that dual credit classes are considered to be university courses that are subject to policies of the sponsoring university. And then the other part of, and then what we did after that as well is adding the conversation that we had about approving the syllabuses of the teacher that's teaching that dual credit class, that would go through an approval process, and that these
And that was primarily to give either the administration and or the board the ability to either pull the class or.
Yep. Yeah.
We don't have a ton of control over what they do in dual credit, but we do have control over whether it's offered.
Whether they offer the class or not.
Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, and the other part of that is that'll be submitted, and I think it was to the superintendent designee for approval. So, and then also that the syllabus will be made available to students and parents who enroll in the course. That the syllabus must clearly identify all curriculum materials that the students will be required to read, view, or otherwise engage with, and all curriculum materials will be made available to the students' parents to preview, and the syllabus for every dual credit course should include the following statement, and this was the statement that we had talked about as well, and also the ISBA that Quinn had talked about adding. I could see a policy coming from ISBA that will have these similar things in it, so we felt like that statement is good, that as a university course, parents and students may not be entitled to the same accommodations as can be provided in a regular high school course. Requests for alternative assignments or curriculum materials may preclude students from earning college credits, but will not impact their opportunity to earn high school credit. So I felt like that would be helpful.
So Jason, on
yes.
that, so that gives students the opportunity to review the syllabus, understand what they're going to be asked to read, and if they choose, if there's material that they don't want to read or participate in, they can opt out. They can drop the class, or can they request an alternative assignment?
Well, so I think what that goes back to is the conversation that we had with the ISU professors, where they had said, at first, they had said, nothing can be changed, but then through talking with them, they said, no, we have students that come up and say, here's the reason why I don't want to read that, and talking through it, that then they could possibly give them an alternative assignment, and then they would stay in for the credit. But if the teacher felt like, no, the student needs to really have whatever this is for the class, then that option would be that you're either taking, you're dropping the class, or you could, because it's a dual credit class, you could get the high school credit, not the college credit. Does that make sense?
But which of those options is available is all subject to the university teacher
The approved
making
syllabus.
that call,
Yep.
as opposed to us getting involved.
But that's the nice thing about them showing that syllabus prior to.
Right.
Yeah, and that was
Start.
and that was one of the suggestions from Quinn, the ISBA was
Yeah.
and we had talked about that before, and even talked with the teacher about that in the process, and so yeah, I mean that was one of the conversations.
If they choose to drop the class, then, and they have to pick up another class, it's going to be too late. I mean, if they work with the high school counselor to get in another class, I wonder how difficult that's going to be.
And I think it would depend on
How late.
if you have like, say it's an English class, for example, and the teacher feels like, you know what, we can put you in our regular senior English class, and they've done similar things, and you may be able to finish with the high school credit that way. I think it would just depend on the situation.
But depending on how late you are in the try or whatever, you may have some university transcript problems, I would assume, if you wait too long.
Yeah, there is a withdrawal, and do you know when?
I think with this, again, because they're seeing the syllabus prior to enrolling in the class, or at least from the very start.
Yeah.
At that point, the parents should have, and the students should have done their due diligence to see whether or not they're going to object to those materials.
Right. It's a full disclosure kind of an issue, and then at that
Yeah.
point, the responsibility's on the consumer, so to speak.
Yeah, and the college courses do have I mean, I felt like it was later than if you were a regular university student. It always felt like that. I know this last trimester when students had extra classes they were taking with university, and some of it the COVID situation pushed universities to allowing them to drop later. But even their regular drop dates feels like it's a little bit later than a regular university student.
But again, all that's just set by the university,
Yeah.
and students have to, I guess, live with what they signed up for.
Yeah,
So the syllabus would be available prior to registration?
yeah. That was a conversation we had with Mr. Telford, and he felt like that could happen. Well, it will happen. When we talked to him, we said, is that possible, or is it out of the question? And he felt like that they could get those syllabuses before.
Well, and I feel like if they felt like they needed an alternative assignment, they could talk to that teacher prior to the start of the course and say,
Right.
I have a problem with this, and here's why. Could I get an alternative assignment? You know, they could have that conversation prior to, rather than having it in the middle of the class.
Right.
You know, the course.
Yeah, yeah.
And if that's something that the teacher's not willing to do, some of these courses are offered at the other high schools, and the teachers, like we have seen, do different things.
Yeah.
That are all approved by the same college, and
Yeah.
they do different things. And so would that be an option too for these kids to just go to another high school to take that particular course?
Yeah, and that happens just in general anyway. Like the student,
Yeah.
there was a student from Hillcrest taking a class here at Thunder Ridge, and yeah. Okay. Any other questions about that section? The next section that we added, we were doing these things, but we didn't really have it in policies, so that if a principal or a teacher had a question, that they could go to this, and this was where it talks about the process for purchasing, which has the approval processes in there. Like we've talked about, that if a teacher wants to purchase novels, for example, they're going to go to a Laserfish form that has, it's our supplementary materials Laserfish form, and at the top of that it has just a link where teachers can click on for the list of approved supplemental materials. Like if you noticed in the consent agenda, we had probably, it's like 200 novels I think on there, and those are all novels that our elementary schools have been using, and we're just trying to get that process all in place so that we have that list of approved novels. So if a teacher clicks on that link, sees that it's in there, then they can request for the novel to be purchased. If it's not on that list, then they'll fill out that Laserfish form for supplementary materials, and then the process of that is coming to the learning team and getting the approval or a non-approval, and then we'd come to you if we felt like we didn't feel comfortable with it. So that one goes through that process.
And so that would include the situation that we had with the book that came up this past try.
Yes. Yeah, and really we wrote this portion really following what we did in that situation.
Okay.
And then the last section is just the guidelines for students using textbooks, and then also if a community member, a citizen, objects to something that we're teaching in the process to that. And then for definitions, we added 2 definitions in there that just weren't a part of the policy with the learning team, and then the supplemental curriculum materials and the definition for that.
Amy's question makes me think, and it's a very good question. Is it clear that the same process for purchasing curricular materials applies to dual credit classes? Because I didn't necessarily read it that way. I mean, I'm glad. I think I heard you just say that's the intent.
Yeah, what I would say is any of the, and I don't think it specifically says dual credit, but anything that we're purchasing or approving for a teacher to teach, supplementary, or like for example, a dual credit book, that a textbook that has to be approved, that it comes through the same process. Curriculum is curriculum, whether it's dual credit or high school credit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Is it worth putting in a statement on number 1 that says all curricular materials, including those for dual credit classes?
It feels to me like that would be an improvement.
So too, yeah.
Just because dual credits dealt with separately in that one section, it seems like it's a little unclear, but whatever you think.
Scott, you're referring to under the heading, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with Greg on that. I think that would be a lot more clear. Even though that's what you guys meant.
Yeah, and no, that's great. Yeah, we can add
was
that.
the intent.
Well, and to me, the more clear we can be in the policies, that's really the purpose of why we wanted to take those three and put them all together, was to try and be more clear and have less questions. So I think that's great.
I just want to see if you're going to put including but not limited to. Including without limitation.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I think it's really well done. I really appreciate all the effort, and I think it addresses a lot of the concerns that we've been wrestling with, so I think it's really good.
Yeah.
This was not an easy situation, and I feel like the board we've kind of all been on different pages at different times. The first night that it was presented to us, some were wanting to make a motion right then and there, and then everybody kind of flipped, you know what I mean? And then did a reversal, and then finally we all came together. It's kind of been all over the map, actually, for how this has gone about. And so I think it's been kind of an interesting thing for us to deal with, and I'm glad that we've taken our time. I feel like you guys have done it right. You guys have listened to all the concerns, and I feel like you guys put everything in that policy that everybody was concerned with, so I think it looks great.
No, thank you. And it was between the learning team and all of our district leadership team and everybody else. We had a Google Doc that people were making notes on and adding things to, and Scott was doing his English job to it and making it sound good. So it was, it was good.
So Jason, and I'm on board. I mean, I appreciate the work you've done. I just want to just repeat this so that I understand it. So under number 2, under process for purchasing curriculum materials. So if it's a novel and it's already been approved, no problem, they purchase it, we're good. If it's on the list. If it's not on the list, they request approval, they submit the form, and does it come to the board at that point, or does the committee look at it?
Yeah, the learning team will then look at anything that's turned in supplemental curricular materials will then come to the learning team.
Okay, so the learning team.
Yes. Now to me there's a difference between a supplemental curricular and a adoption, where if we're saying we're going to adopt this textbook for math, for example, that's going to come to the board. But novels, the things that teachers, our definition of supplemental curriculum materials is printed instructional materials or digital content that are used on a consistent or regular basis and addresses only a portion of the course content, are required to be used by all students in the class and are used in conjunction with a core text to provide differentiated instructional experiences to those students who need them. So I think the example that I use with teachers quite often is if a teacher has a novel that they're going to read in a 4th grade class and all students have to read that novel, then that's where it becomes that supplemental to our Houghton Mifflin material. So we would want that approved as supplemental because the student doesn't have the choice not to read it. Now, if a teacher says, okay, here's our books, we're going to do an assignment, you pick whatever novel you would like to read, and we're going to do literature circles and write and talk about it, then that's going to be different than that supplemental, if that makes sense.
So let's go back to the example we had.
Okay.
A dual credit class, a novel that was, a student didn't want to read, but they're already in class. That should have gone through this process.
Yes.
So that the board would have been able to look at that and approve it.
Yes. So it should have gone through the supplemental curricular approval process through the learning team. And like I said, none of this was in the policy before, right. And that's why we were wanting to try and get it in there so that principals and teachers know that if they're saying, hey, we want to purchase this book, okay, if you remember the policy, or typically what I tell them is, okay, go look on the supplementary curricular form to see if it's been approved. If it hasn't, fill out this form, and then they'll go fill that out, and then we'll approve or not approve or look at it. But like I said, I mean, yeah, none of this was we didn't have this anywhere besides just different conversations of when someone was purchasing something or asking for funds.
So Jason, when you said it would go through the team, what was the name of the team?
Learning team.
The learning team.
Mm-hmm.
To be approved, in number 3, doesn't it then say that it would come to the board to be approved?
Yeah, so the consent agenda that you had, it will have all, and typically you're not going to have, like if we have something that's either we're like, I don't know, we're not going to put it on the consent agenda. We'll put it on the regular agenda, and we'll talk about it. Like the ones that you saw today where there were 200 or whatever, those are books that have been in our schools for years. And yeah, I mean, if you look at that list, many of your children have probably read those and been through them. So, but especially new novels or just different curriculum that's coming through, if we're unsure. On that learning team, it has, right now it has Corey Telford, and it changes. It's based off of our DLT team, our district leadership team, that we have a learning team that has, like right now it has Dr. Thurber, it has Corey Telford, it has myself, Julian, Rex, Heath and Scott, and Ken Marlowe, and then Elisa Saffel and Tina Orm. So those are the ones that are looking at those, that curriculum that's coming in and making that determination if we feel like it's of good material that, and we look at grade level, we look at all of those different things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that work, yeah.
Where's the parental role? You know how earlier in the policy it talks about 1/4 of the committee being composed of non-educators, trustees. You know what I'm saying, at the top of page 2? Yeah. Is that fourth?
That's in the textbook adoptions. We're actually adopting a core textbook. We have that committee.
Okay. For supplemental, we're generally not using that committee, we're using the learning team.
Yes, yeah.
Instead, and then again, the board's got final approval.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did the parental rights bill get addressed with this whole thing?
It's at least part of the reason for the disclosure, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement.
Oh, where it says objections to use
Under
of curriculum
number
materials?
1, under
Yeah.
objections.
Okay.
Sorry, where's objections?
It's on the 4th page.
Yeah, 4th page,
At
yep. In the, yeah.
mid-page.
And it's the black. Yeah, we've always, that was its own separate policy before.
Okay. Yeah, sorry if this was already said, but that policy that portion of the policy would apply to any curriculum, materials, supplemental or otherwise?
Yeah, so if you look at that, it has a form that basically has the parents put a statement of why they're objecting to whatever the material is, and then that comes to us and we review that. And
this is really minor, Scott, but at the bottom of page 2, it seems like supplemental curriculum materials is a defined term and probably should be capitalized when we're using it that way. Am I reading that correctly? In other words, at the back, supplemental curricular materials is a defined term. Maybe the M needs to be capitalized there too, and then when you use it in the policy, have we normally capitalized? I think we have. You see what I'm saying? So like right here, when we say at the bottom of page 2, number 2, it's in blue on my copy, list of approved
It's the link.
Should that be capitalized there? That's really minor. We can talk about this later. Right, right. Yeah, I get that, but
Yeah. Right there.
when we use the defined term.
Go up one. Right there. And it's the link.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I think I've said it. I don't know how important it is, but do you follow what I'm saying? Okay, you can do whatever you think is best to make it clear, but.
Okay. So, and now that we've gone through that, now we'll go to the policy part of it. So, what you're receiving is this policy, and it's under the administrative reports information. This will be submitted for initial consideration. Then you'll have the time to review these documents till a regular board meeting scheduled on July 8th. At that meeting, with your approval, this policy would be resubmitted for their first reading 30-day review. You'll notice that they're coordinating these policies with introduction to the policies and procedures that the board approved, and it serves as the introduction to our policy manual. Any other thought?
So just based on this conversation, I appreciate the question about the parental rights. And one thing that I want to start doing with our policies is we oftentimes cross-reference policies at the bottom, but people miss that. I think it's important to actually put in references to other policies that are pertinent. So we do have a parental rights policy that aligns to the state statute. That's policy 2428. So I do think under the objections, we ought to put in a second statement that simply says parents have the right to reasonable accommodations, just some type of summary according to policy 2428, and include that link if that's amenable to the board. So if you're okay, I'd like to just verbally say we'll make that addition before we send it out, or before we bring it to you for 30-day review.
Yeah, and again, there's kind of an issue of how does that parental rights interplay with the dual credit issue, right?
Right.
So
Right.
however you word it,
Yeah.
it seems like we ought to be,
Right.
we shouldn't overstate
Right.
what
And-
the rights are if it's a dual
Yeah.
credit class.
And probably just under that same premise, going back up to that dual credit section, will include the reference to that policy. That'd be much more specific than just the statement we have right now. So we'll make those couple of changes to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Yeah, I like that.
I would just think, just based on the history of how this all came about, that it would be nice to get a copy to the Lamson family just early on, just so they, I mean, they may be watching, may already know, I don't know, but it'd be nice. I mean, they certainly brought a lot of good issues
Yeah.
for us to consider, and just be nice to
Yeah.
make sure they have a copy of it and can comment in future meetings.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Is there any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Okay. We're good? All right. Is there any other discussion from the board or questions? Anything? Okay. So, thank you, Jason, and all the people that have worked so hard on this. It's taken a long time to get this far, so I was not expecting this to be a 6-month thing, so anyway. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward on the agenda. Guy Wainsgard talking to us about budget and fee hearing.
So we don't do this very often, so I'll take just a minute and explain the process and the agenda items, because it can be a little bit confusing. According to state statute, before the board adopts the budget for the coming year, there's a couple things that we have to do. One of them is we have to hold a public hearing and give the public opportunity to comment on the budget. And then this year, we've had some fees requested that are greater than a 5% increase, and so we also have to give the public the opportunity to comment on those fees. So that information has all been sent to the newspaper and been published according to state statute. And so I'll go over some highlights of both of those items, and then we would need to hold a public hearing to see if anybody would like to comment on any of those items. And then there's an action item after that to actually adopt the fee increases and adopt the budget. So we'll start with the fee increase. In the board packet, you'll see the increase requested. Rimrock Drama Club is requested to go from their current $20 to $30. Then there are some student breakfast and lunch fee increases noted on there. We haven't increased lunch or breakfast prices for several years, so this kind of catches us back up to where we need to be. The bottom two, the custodial per hour charges, as we looked at what we need to be charging to make sure we're cleaning buildings appropriately when we have rentals, we haven't been consistent in all of our buildings on what we're charging per hour, and so that's why the current fee shows varies, because it really varies between buildings, and so we're bringing that into standard practice. And the $30 per hour on the weekend accounts for overtime that would likely be worked by the custodians cleaning. There were a couple other fee increase requests, but they were below the 5%, so they don't require approval, but just wanted to make you aware of what those are. These are at the three traditional high schools. They're asking to increase parking from $20 to $21, and activity cards would also increase $1 from $37 to $38. Any questions regarding the fee increases?
I have a question on the custodial per hour. Does that include use of our gyms on weekends for local basketball clubs?
So there's a separate schedule that specifies how much we charge for a gym, for a classroom, for different building spaces. This is just the custodial charge that we're changing. All the others would remain according to the current schedule. Does that?
Okay.
So currently, they're paying that current fee in the schedule and maybe something for custodial, but it varies.
Right, correct.
So we charge rent, but we're not charging, we don't charge rent.
We have a separate agreement with both the City of Iona and the City of Idaho Falls for usage of our gyms.
Okay.
Basketball. They do not pay rent for that. They pay supervisors to keep score, be in the building, pay the referees, all those types of things. With the City of Iona, there's a profit split when it's all said and done. The City of Idaho Falls, we trade facilities. We had intended to meet with the City of Idaho Falls. I believe it was in March, and because of the situation, that was canceled, and we have not reconvened with them to reevaluate our use agreement with the City of Idaho Falls.
But they would not be charged a custodial fee to clean up after?
No, we negotiate separate contracts, separate agreements for those types of activities.
Do those groups use our locker rooms, or do they typically come? Okay. Yeah.
So can you give me an example of like who might be paying the custodial fee going forward? What would be a...
So there could be dance groups in the community that run our facilities, choir groups, craft fairs.
Okay. And then are they quoted the number of hours that we expect? So it's like on the front end they agree it's going to be 4 hours or whatever.
When they do the rental contract, that contract includes supervision, and so typically we require a district employee to be there. And then separate spot for custodial, and we
Okay.
give them a quote in advance of this type of an event, we're going to charge you 4 hours of custodial when it's
Okay.
over to clean up and
Okay, yep.
those types of things.
So it's factored in. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, that's all I have on the fees. I don't know if we, probably, do you want to see if there's any questions from the public on fees before we move on to the budget piece?
Yeah, we can do that, and would those have been sent to Mary? Would those have been on that, on the district page? And then, are we wanting to motion on that now, or do you want to go through everything? and then
Right,
come
yeah,
back
so
and
right now would just be the hearing, and then the motions would come after we
all of-
finish.
all of the fees?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Recruiting a couple protesters out there. Unanimous.
All right, then we'll move on to a summary of the budget for the coming year. I will say in the many years of preparing budgets, this has been probably the most interesting budget preparation to do. As we started the process, we received the information from the governor that there would be a 1% holdback in the current year, and then the proposal for the coming year is a 5%. Although that's not, right now, that's just a recommendation. It's not an actual holdback at this point because we're not in July and the governor isn't able to do that. And so the State Department has taken that information and given us their best guess as to what we should budget on the revenue side. And so I've incorporated all the suggestions from the State Department on our revenue and then pushed through all of our expenditures. The publication was due to the newspaper prior to the time we finished our negotiations with the teachers. And so if we were to get into the nitty-gritty detail, the nitty-gritty detail doesn't match exactly what was negotiated, but that's happened many times before. That's not necessarily unusual. And really the difference this year is because we're shifting some of the benefit costs to employees, salaries went up, and so it's just a shift between the two categories. I'll talk for just a minute about this sheet that was in the packet, the budget assumptions. If you look at November enrollment, our budget for the current year that we're in, 13,119 students, we're looking at about 13,594. So we continue to grow, but not quite as quickly as we have been in the past. Budgeting a 94% average daily attendance, but in light of current circumstances, I really don't know what that means. I would guess that our attendance over the course of the next year would be lower than that, and that we'll have to take advantage of the waivers that the state grants to get us to our regular level of attendance. And those factors combine into what the state calls support units. We would grow to 647 support units. And then you can see the different revenue line items. So that's a $797,000 increase over state revenue from the prior year. If you were to look back into prior years, that increase is usually $3 to $4 million, so it's quite a difference this year. Basically freezing salaries for all classifications of employees. Next item we want to talk about is a supplemental levy. I'm showing, I have a question.
Yeah, before you go on, if you don't mind, if I could clarify the $797,000 increase, is it fair to say that that would largely be a function of the increased attendance as opposed to the per student amount?
Yes,
increasing?
due to our growth,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yes. Supplemental levy, this is our second year of our approved supplemental levy. So that will need to be approved not for the coming budget cycle, but for the year after that. The emergency levy, because our growth is slowing, we probably won't qualify for the full emergency levy. I've budgeted $2 million, which is the same amount that we took this year, because if we don't budget it and we do qualify, then we can't claim it. And so we won't know those numbers until September. And so we'll bring those numbers back to you in September before we actually certify our levy amounts to the county. So this is really just a kind of a broad overview of the emergency levy, and then we'll get into more details as we know more information on that.
Guy, which page are you on? Which slide?
So it's
there's 72 slides on here.
okay, so there's another document that's a 2-page summary.
Am I in the wrong one? Close that one out.
So back up.
Right there. Okay, I'm sorry.
Nope, thanks for. So as I mentioned before, this budget was based on prior to negotiation, so I had built in the 8.75% increase in medical insurance, but now really we'll just do some internal shifting to make that happen. We did have a little bit of a surprise. Right before schools were closed down, I had a visit from State Insurance Fund representative letting us know that they were going to change how they rated us for our workers' compensation premiums. They didn't give me any details, just said expect a little bit of a change. I think it was towards the end of April, I received a phone call with the details, and it ended up being about a $200,000 increase, which was not at all what we were expecting. And so we'll be working with them very closely over the next year to see exactly why that happened and what we can do to slow that down or reduce that in coming years. One piece, go ahead.
Did we have an overabundance of claims?
So there's several pieces. One of them is that we have a fairly good year being replaced with a year where we had significant claims, but the majority of the increase is due to a new matrix they are using to assign rates based on what they believe, what procedures we have in place to prevent and mitigate claims. And the person I talked to didn't have the exact details, gave me contact information for somebody else that we need to work with over the coming year to understand why we received the rating we did and what we can do to improve that.
Gotta love insurance.
Yeah.
Yep.
The black box.
One of the things that is always a challenge is estimating how much revenue we're going to receive from Medicaid reimbursements. This year there was actually some changes in those laws, which had this been a normal year, we would have generated more Medicaid revenue substantially than in prior years. With the way things changed, we're probably going to end up being very similar to where we were last year. But again, that's a very difficult one to project. And so if we base, when I'm looking at the total budget and trying to figure out where are we going to end next year, the projection is that we would end at 4.27% contingency as long as our Medicaid targets are hit, and that we use all of the $1.2 million in CARES money in the general fund. Now, I'll tell you right now that that's not going to happen because there's things. So just this week, one of the things that came up was we needed to have thermometers for every classroom in the district, all of our buses. And so just that alone 750 thermometers at $44 each, I believe, Gordon, is about $33,000. So that's the type of thing that will come from the CARES money. There's going to be lots of those pieces, and so we'll fill as much of that 1.2 million back to the general fund as we can, but there are going to be some things that we're not able to backfill the general fund, and we'll be spending on things that we normally wouldn't be spending money on. Now, as usual, when a budget is built, it's built on, there's a lot of conservative numbers in there, a lot of projections. But I don't think it's going to be, it won't be any better than this by much. I'm really hoping that the Medicaid revenue comes in on target. We have enough fund balance to get us through this coming year. The year after that is where it's really going to be a challenge, because this year we're using several pieces of one-time money to help us. So for example, we received word in late December that we have a holiday on our Percy sick leave payment. So for the last 6 months of this fiscal year and for 12 months of next fiscal year, we don't have to pay in money to Percy sick leave. So when we start our fiscal year 22 budget, that's going to look like about a $600,000 add, even though it's just getting back to normal. Also in fiscal year 22, we'll be bringing on Black Canyon Middle School, which is somewhere between $750,000 and $800,000, or excuse me, $1 million of operating costs. And so I'm confident we can get through this year. The next year, we're really going to have to look at what the legislature allows us to do. Right now, they haven't relaxed any rules as far as staffing, given us more flexibility. Just none of that is there yet, so we can't really adjust anything. And so next year, I don't like to think about the year after that, because it's just, I'm not sure. It's going to be, it will be tough, but it will really come down to what the legislature allows us to do. And I don't know, Scott, if there's anything you want to.
Yeah, just for, I guess, maybe clarification, explanation. When we faced the recession back in 2008 and 2009, one of the key steps the legislature took was, prior to that, there was a use it or lose it provision in Idaho code that said you have to hire 100% of the teachers that you're funded for, or you'll lose funding for those positions. To help districts face the recession, they let us go down to 90%. And as a result of that, we had pretty massive cutbacks in our staffing that year. We laid off quite a few counselors. We tightened up other positions. And I don't remember the number now, but it's somewhere around 70, 75 positions we were able to cut. And then the next year, the legislature received a lot of pressure that the school districts had cut too much, and so they put in this really interesting, it's probably the nicest adjective I can use, state law that says that if your average class attendance is higher than the state average, then you lose 1% a year until you match the state average. So just kind of think through the logic of that. I mean, you're always going to be losing until theoretically everybody gets to the same point, but it's really difficult for us to, say, compete with Boise that has a really high supplemental levy. We'll never be able to match their staffing levels, which means essentially we're going to go to 100% at some point. And so, you know, even as we've just talked tentatively about, well, can we reduce teachers in this program or that program? For example, you know, we brought back the GATE program, theoretically using our supplemental levy almost, 4 or 6 years ago. 4 years ago is when we brought the GATE program back. We brought in the PE music program, but we can't even eliminate or push those teachers back to the classroom because we have to hire the staff that they're telling us. And so this next year it's 96%. So I mean, there's literally just, we're staffed at the very bare minimum we can, and there's just nowhere to eliminate staffing. Unless you go to classified, but I mean, our classified is already pretty bare bones. So anyway, it's going to be a challenge because as you are aware, 90% of our budget comes from staffing costs between salaries and benefits. So just not sure where those deep cuts are that we could make to help this.
The other comment I wanted to make was regarding property taxes and tax rates. I received in the mail this week, and some of you may have received your tax notices as well. Preliminary numbers from Bonneville County show that our market value in our district increased another 17% this year. And so, which is even higher than last year. And so I think we have scheduled some time later this summer to talk about a levy plan and tax rate plan. And I think that's going to be very critical because you combine those 2 years of a 14 and a 17, that's a pretty major impact to taxpayers. And so definitely something that we'll need to talk to. And again, that's something that just because we're setting the budget tonight does not set those rates and amounts are set in September when we certify to the county our taxes.
So basically the same time we do the emergency levy finalization.
Yes, yep, exactly. I'm just going to look at my notes here and make sure we've covered all of the. So there's two pieces that we have to wait for, and for the emergency levy, we have to have our second day of school. The first day of school, we don't have everybody in attendance because we have the 9th graders and the 7th graders this coming year that will only be there at the secondary. So we measure our emergency levy on the second day of school, which would be September 1st this year. And then the other piece that we have to have is the final market values from the counties. Usually that comes the first week of September. So it's let me see if I have the actual, because by code, we have to have our tax certification is due to the county on September 10th, so we could do it at the Wednesday, the 9th board meeting, so that the timing works out well this year. So that's the high level. So this is the actual budget document that the State Department asked us to prepare. Chad, this is what you were looking at earlier. Lots of pages, lots of detail. When we get to that point in the agenda, this is the actual budget that is being adopted. So at this point, we would probably again need to, I know there was at least one person who called the district office and inquired about coming to this meeting. So if they are here in the public room, we could certainly invite them to make comments. I don't know if he was able to come or not, but we need to give the public that opportunity. Okay, so that would conclude the fee hearing and the budget hearing for that portion of the agenda item, and then we'd be able to move into the action item if you're prepared for that.
Does the board have any other questions?
I don't.
I have one. Back on the emergency levy.
Mm-hmm.
So last year we approved that right after the election. This year, now, can you explain your comment here, Guy? We do not expect to qualify for the full amount. However, we can't levy more than we budget. So this provides us a buffer.
So last year what happened was when we looked at our growth, we weren't going to qualify for the full amount, but then we had some enrollment in Bonneville Online Elementary School that actually pushed our ADA up high enough that we could qualify for the full amount. So I don't know if anything like that will happen again. So what I've done is I've budgeted the $2 million. So I'm expecting it'll be closer to 1.5 million. So I've inflated the revenue by $500,000, and then I've also inflated our expenditures by $500,000 so that those two net together in case something happens that we decide, so that we have that option. If I only budget the 1.5 million and we qualify for 2 million,
Then
we can't.
you can't go back.
Because we can't levy more than the budget was approved for.
I see.
So I think really what's going to happen this year, just because there are still so many unknowns, is that we will probably do, once we know more, maybe once we get into September, October, November, it's likely that we will relook at the budget, and we have the option of doing a formal budget revision. We can do an informal revision, but I think we'll definitely need to do some kind of look, whether it's formal or not, once we know a lot of these answers.
Thank you.
All right, is there any other questions, discussion? All right. All right, so hearing none, we would need a motion to approve the fee increases that were on that sheet that Guy had talked about with regards to the school lunch fees and the custodial fees, all of those. So,
I move that we approve the proposed fee increases.
I would second that.
okay, it's been moved by Mr. Calder, seconded by Mr. Jenkins. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And then with regards to our 2021 district budget, we would need a motion to approve, or a motion to not approve, whatever you guys want. We need a motion on the budget.
I move we approve the budget as presented.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Calder to approve the budget and seconded by Mr. Dance. Is there any discussion on the budget? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So motion carries. And then we're going to turn the time over to Heath Jackson to discuss the admin salary schedule.
Thank you. This is on page 290 in your packet. Tonight on the consent calendar, we approved the contracts for our administrators throughout the district. And so this action will be to approve the salary schedule for those administrators that have been approved in the district. The salary schedule is very similar to last year. As you recall, through our conversations, through negotiations, the state has froze salaries across the district, across the state. And so we've passed that through to our administrators as well. And through negotiations, we approved a $500 increase as a one-time payment for teachers. And that's what we're proposing to the administrative salary as well. And so on the salary schedule, you'll see a $500 increase to our administrator salary schedule. This will help offset the employee contribution to their health benefits that will be now included in and required of our employees depending on which medical benefit package they choose, whether it's the traditional PPO or the new HSA plan that we have approved for upcoming year. So there's not any significant changes to the salary schedules. We've passed that same increase on to our administrators. We've frozen changes in years. So down, if you look at the experience section, we've increased that by 1 year to freeze salaries just like we did with our certified teaching staff. And so really treating the administrative salary schedule equitable to the same standard and same expectations that we pass through to our certified teachers in the negotiation process. And then we've kept the education category the same, just like with our certified staff. If they reach that 24 credits or the bachelor's, or the master's degree, there is some additional funding for that. We've kept that exactly the same to continue to provide education to our administrators who have continued their education past a master's degree. I'm not aware of any this year that would apply to. There's several that are working on that, but none that applies to in a change this year.
So the $500 would be reflected in that base number that we're seeing on that
Yes.
schedule?
Yes.
Okay, so that's $500 more than it was last
Yes.
year or whatever. Okay. Yep.
Is there any other questions from the board regarding the salary schedule?
And I would make a motion to approve the administrator's salary schedule.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Jenkins and seconded by Mr. Calder. Is there any discussion about that? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. So we would need a call for agenda items for our upcoming meetings. Is there any agenda items that the board or district would like to see put on any of the upcoming meetings?
September 9th meeting will need to include approval of certification of tax levies.
As I mentioned earlier, just did our work session, I think primarily I'd like to devote that to our reopening plan. Of course, if there's other topics that are relevant, we can add that as well, but I'd like to have a good amount of time to go through that with the board. At the work session, yes.
Okay. Is there anything else?
I think this should be our location for all board meetings, well, not once the school year starts. We'll have to talk with Mr. McLaren and see about availability of this once the school year starts, so are we good? Okay, yeah, I just as soon keep things here through December. Thank you. If the board's, if this feels like this is a workable location, but I think it's our best option for physical distancing and to also accommodate the public.
Okay. And then just a reminder to the board meetings, with regards to the email that was sent out about next week's work session and the documents that need to be gone over, so. Okay, I think unless there's any other agenda items, then I think we're good. We would need a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Dance, seconded by Mr. Calder. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned.